In this video, we're going to continue the process of 3D modeling and work on our player character. So I'm going to clean up the scene just a little bit, delete some of these elements that we were messing around with. At this point, I'd probably go through and kind of build out the scene using some of the objects, some of these rocks and things like that. But let's go forward and push ahead and make a new kind of avatar for our character. So what I want to do here is kind of push this game more towards like a tank game, and the reason why I want to do this is to show you how you can use the hierarchy of objects to do things like independent aiming and movement, because I think it's kind of cool and it might be useful. Obviously, we've kind of set up our character a little bit like a humanoid. We're using the capsule collider for that. So to make this accurate, we may want to shift this to a different type of collider, but we'll kind of explore that as we go and see if the collisions end up looking a little strange. But the idea is to create kind of a simple boxy tank model, so kind of a cube-based thing, and then have a turret on top, and the turret's going to aim and be where we fire the projectiles from. So let's jump back into Maya. We already have this scene going, and I'm going to kind of just use this scene as my general purpose scene. I know we named it player. We have a rock in here now, but it's just going to be kind of my scene that I'm going to model everything in. You can totally have different Maya files for different assets. That's a much better way to work. But for this simple project, I'm just going to leave this in the scene. We can move it off to the side or something, but it's probably easier just to hide it. So you can press H on the keyboard, and if you want to get it back, I recommend using the outliner, which is if you click on the left toolbar here, the panel layouts, you can show the outliner. I'm going to also rename this, probably a good idea, rock. I keep the outliner open just as like default, because I like to see exactly what's in the scene and what is parented to other objects. Okay, so let's start modeling. I don't really have a plan for this yet. I should probably pull up some reference or something, but I have a kind of vague idea of what I want to do. And I want to show you some useful tools that exist inside of Maya, just to make things look a little prettier and yeah, make them look more polished. So I'm gonna go ahead and start modeling this, and I'm gonna use this the box modeling approach. So starting from a primitive shape, adding subdivisions and detail, and extruding and adding more detail as you go. The reason I like the box modeling approach is that if you start off with a general shape, a form, you can easily kind of refine it from there. It's harder if you're working from extruding edges or putting points down or something like that, because you sometimes just don't know where you're going. So for certainly for hard surface modeling, box modeling seems to be easier in my opinion. So the first thing I want to set up is kind of the dimensions of our tank. I like using these the create options here, so clicking on the attribute editor, going to the polycube or whatever the shape is, and then just plugging in different parameters. I know maybe that height's a little too big, but I know that's kind of the rough size I want. Let's go back down to 0.9 for the height. And that might be good. And then let's make sure it's sitting on the ground, so 0.45 is half 0.9. That's looking pretty good there. Let's go back to, you can also access them just here. Let's add some subdivisions. I always like to add just a couple subdivisions, just because it makes the modeling process a little bit easier. The other thing I like to do is have my UV editor open. So go to UVs and have that kind of open. And you can see here that the UV editor is not really set up to oh, that was bad. Usually try and dock it right there, but sometimes it's really hard to get it. There we go, perfect. Oh no, that was not it. that was the toolkit. Let's try this again. There we go. Okay, so I usually have it side by side right here, so I can kind of see. I like to UV as I go, because waiting until the very end is sometimes trying to sort of unscramble a massive, web of things that don't make sense. So like at this point, I'm like, okay, well my UVs obviously don't match my shape because these proportions are different, and I can tell if I turn on the grid checkerboard overlay, you can see that these aren't perfect squares. So at this point, I'm just going to do a automatic unwrap, and I could choose to change some settings around here. Right now, it's kind of packed everything as densely as possible with a little bit of gaps between stuff. I could also choose to like overlap some things if I wanted to. So like this is obviously the same shape as this one. The bottom is the same shape as the top, so I could choose to sync those up. A nifty way of syncing things up in the UV editor here is if you hold down the D key, it's going to change the pivot point, and then you can press the V, hold down V on the keyboard to snap it to a point. There's one in the center, so I was already there. But you can like find a corner, snap it there, press D to go back to your regular move tool, and then hold down V again, and it's gonna, if they're the same, perfectly align them. That was kind of a nifty way to work there. So you could do D, V, D, and V, and there you go. So this is obviously, Maya is very much a tool that you will get used to, and navigating around it can present its own challenges. Okay, let me take my face over here and snap those together as well. Okay, so I'm just sort of aligning stuff together a little bit more carefully. So I have my fronts and backs and things like that aligned in the UV layout. Now let's go ahead and add some detail to this. So a couple things. I want some tank treads down at the bottom. We may end up adding some geometry for those as well. And I want my top to have some interesting detail. So I can, depending on what my reference is, I'm just kind of winging this and making it up as I go. I can adjust some things. Now I might want some more detail here, and since I have this kind of primitive shape, I can go to my mesh tools and do an insert edge loop, and if I can click properly, that I'm clicking and dragging now, and it's creating an edge loop around here. I can also undo that and put it a little bit further back. I can also take edges, double click them to select them, and then use the bevel tool here. Now the bevel tool is really nice because it gives you a quick way to add these chamfered edges, which add a nice sort of polish to your assets. The problem is you can kind of see in the UV editor here, it's kind of broken things a little bit, kind of borked the layout. So I do end up using the bevel tool for some things, but it does require cleanup after the fact. But if your shapes are pretty primitive, you can do just what I did a moment ago and go to your mesh tools and choose insert edge loop. The problem is if you're trying to work on a symmetrical model and you do insert edge loop on one side, you have to insert your edge loop on the other side. So you can use Maya's symmetry to help you out. So if you right click, let's see, hold down Control and right click. I always forget. Okay, it's Control Shift right click, and that will bring up your symmetry options, and you can enable symmetry. And now you can test by like selecting a vertex over here, and it's not correct right now because our our symmetry isn't along the correct axis. So if you need to change it, you can go to symmetry and then choose whichever axis is correct. So that's correct. This is actually interesting because I didn't think when we started which axis I was orienting things to. It kind of should be the other way, but let's just do it and then we can fix it later. But anyway, so with symmetry added, let's say I go back to object mode and I go add edge loop, insert edge loop. Now I get symmetrical edge loops. So that's kind of a way to work around that limitation there. And then, whoops, and then I can pick object or my corner edges and push them down a little bit. And now my edges here are not breaking in the UV layout, which is nice. They're not quite right though. There's this sort of rounding happening, and that is due to the mesh display settings. It's taking these edges and trying to smooth across them. So if you select those edges and go to mesh display and then harden edge, you're going to get nice, crisp, clean edges, and it's going to look much better. Let's go to edge mode back again. And I actually have, I could probably add a cut along here. Let me show you how to do that. So if you need to cut across your mesh like this, go to mesh tools again and then multi-cut, and then you can select. It's a little bit hard with the symmetry selection, so maybe back out of that and turn symmetry off, and then go to multi-cut and cut across there. And we should get those vertices in the middle too. Let's see if we did. Oops. Yeah, there we go. It's not looking too bad. One trick is if you want to select a bunch of edges, you click on the first one, shift double click on the last, and it'll select all of them in between. Just going to harden those edges. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. This one's not hard either. G is a really useful key in Maya. It will repeat the last action that you've performed. So you can go through here, and if you're going through and hardening all the edges, you can just hit G to redo that. And then let's do a multi-cut along the front too. Multi-cut here to here, hit enter, and then push these edges back a little bit. Okay, that's looking alright. This tank's kind of just a blobby shape right now, so we're going to need to add some more detail and stuff to it. Let's see, what do we want to do? Let's take our faces here, and kind of looks funky. Let's take our front faces. One nice thing about having the UVs open side by side is that you can double click on UVs, select UVs, and modify them. So, like our face right here, I've double clicked there, and then I can go into the scene and shift that around. So it's kind of a nice way to work where you can select stuff in your UVs if they're set up as UV islands by just double clicking on them. Okay, let's do another. Well, let's take these edges right here. Yeah, so for instance, right there, instead of selecting one and selecting the other, I could have just drag selected in my UVs and done that. Let's take this here, and then let's take our faces. Let's turn on symmetry again. Take our faces and Control E to extrude, and then pull the. No. Let's do that again. Symmetry still on? No. Back out of that. Okay, Control E, and then let's pull this in and scale them. Whoa. Why is it doing that? Come on. There we go. Scale them down a little bit. Okay, so what I'm trying to make here is kind of like a like a tank tread container, but I don't want these faces on the bottom. And with games is actually, you want to pay attention to stuff you don't need. So like if we're never going to see the bottom of this tank, I could probably just delete all of this. I think it's this whole face right here. Let's move this out. Select this one. If I hit delete, yeah, that does work. Sometimes it doesn't work if you delete after selecting in the islands. So you might have to go and hold down Control, right click, and then choose two faces, and just do it that way. Okay, so I want to create some tank treads here. Let me shift some stuff around for a minute just to make it feel a little more bulky. You know what? I could probably take all of these, because this is kind of a low poly deal. I could take all of these and just harden all the edges, and that's going to help. Well, those ones are a little bit weird now. Okay, I'm getting way too caught up in modeling here. Let's leave this as it is, and start working on a turret. We can add some tank tracks in a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and start on a turret and start setting this up with the anticipation that I'm going to kind of have two articulating different points. Okay, so the idea is here we're going to have our tank base, which is going to be sitting on the ground and kind of moving around. I'm going to finish it up in a bit. And then on top of that, we are going to have a turret. And the reason why I wanted to show you how to do this is because the hierarchy in Maya is persistent between Maya and Unity. So you can actually kind of use it to your advantage if you're a modeler and you want to set up a specific kind of character or set of hard surfaces that are connected in a specific way. So right here I'm going to rename my cube to tank base, and we'll work on fixing this guy up later. But now I want to model a turret, and I'm going to start off from a cylinder, and in my in my attribute editor, I'm going to change the height down to 0.2, radius down to 0.5, and I'm just going to move it up so I can kind of see radius 0.3. And I'm going to add some subdivisions on the cap, maybe 3 subdivisions on the cap, and 2 on the height. And that's looking good. That's looking good to kind of start off with, at least. And now I'm just going to sort of place and construct this into a little turret. So I'm going to turn off my symmetry, and let's open my UVs. Again, this is a useful thing of having UVs open, is you can select stuff in the UVs and it will select in the scene. Shift, comma and period, so like left and right angle bracket is super useful in Maya. It lets you change your selection, increase it, decrease it. It's looking okay, and you can select edge loops by selecting one face and shift selecting an adjacent face, and it'll try and select as much as it can. I don't need this whole base on here, so I can actually select all of that and just delete it. Oh, here, it did it. So this is a situation. I selected this and then hit delete, and it didn't select the geometry. I don't know why it did that before and is not doing it now, but if you double click on it in the UV editor and then it does that, you just need to hold down Control, right click, and go to faces and then hit delete, and then that's gonna work. So yeah, I'm not sure why it's sometimes working, sometimes it's not working, but yeah, it's the way it is. It's the way Maya functions. Okay, let's see, what do I want to do here? Let's extrude this up a little bit and create kind of a barrel connector thing. Maybe a little too high on that. Okay, I feel like that's pretty good. Let's select across those. Create that, squash it down. And that'll be kind of cool. Let's actually take these and squash them in a little bit. Alright, that's nifty. I got some edge mesh display issues, so like this one looks like it needs to go hard. These ones are hard around the edge here. Oh, these ones need to go hard for sure. You might like that, or you might not. If you want to smooth stuff out like that, you can select one and then shift and select. Oh, I went the wrong way. Let's try it this way. Grab a couple more. And then if you want to select all of the interior edges, go back to that control and right click and choose 2 edges and then do contained edges. That's going to select all of those kind of in between edges, and then you can do a smooth on those or a soften edge. Okay, that's looking pretty good. This feels weird that it's not smooth, so let's harden that. Yeah, that's just kind of funky, I guess. That's okay, I won't show. This needs to be hardened as well. Cool. Alright, there's our little turret. Oh, I'm actually going to add a barrel. Yeah, it needs a barrel. So let's go to this, create a new thing. This is like time-lapse mode, because, you know, you're probably not going to do this exact same thing, so I'm kind of going fast. Whoa, that's long. Let's do that. Ooh, I know what I'm going to do. Some height. Let's do like 8 subdivisions. Whoa. Alright, sweet. Plug that in there. That's looking pretty dope. Let's grab faces, do some expanding, and create like a squared off barrel type thing, which is going to be a little weird, but it'll be cool. And these, and then, oh, no, that's not what I want. Let's do these. Whoa. Symmetry on? That's okay. I'm going to harden some edges, create that definition a bit more. Can't even see those. Did that even work? Sometimes if these aren't working, you can unlock your normals and there's all the other edges that need to be hardened, kinda. There we go. Yeah. That's okay, I guess. It was cooler in my head. Whoa. I guess that's gonna look okay from the top down. Like, that's the thing. You'll quickly learn if you're making a game like a top-down game. You're so far away, typically, the camera perspective, that you'll spend like hours working on tiny little details, and they won't even show up, and you'll learn not to do that because you can get lost in the details for sure, and then, you know, waste time, and your team's like mad about nothing being done, and you're like, I'm trying, but yep, it's just the way it goes. All right, that's kind of cool. So let's. I'm gonna add some bevels. I'm doing a really horrible job of updating my UVs with this. I'm like not even paying attention to the UVs. Like I said, it's usually something I try and do as I'm going, but for this, I've just been moving way too fast. The other thing is you can see here that I've got all of this construction history. Anytime you extrude or soften an edge or do whatever, it's creating construction history. So at some point you want to go through and select your objects and go edit, delete by type, history, and then freeze your transforms as well. But the thing about freezing transforms is that for this especially, we want to be kind of careful because we want to know what the pivot point of our turret is going to be. Because what we're going to do is have the game object in Unity get rotated around whatever its pivot point is. So its pivot point kind of needs to be in the center of this object, and it is right now. But if you had moved it, or if you had like taken the vertices or the faces, your pivot point might be offset like that. So to adjust your pivot point on an object, you just want to select it, go to modify and bake pivot, and that's going to kind of hard code it to wherever it is. The problem is if it's in the wrong place, you need to move it first. So hit D on the keyboard, and then you can move your pivot point around. When you release, it will deselect it, but it hasn't saved it yet, so you need to go to that modify bake pivot. So for this, like if I wanted to set my pivot to perfectly be in the center, so I can rotate it, I might want to snap it to this vertex. So I can go to D, and then I can hold down V and make sure it's in the right spot. Yep, that looks right. Press D again, and then go to bake pivot. And now if I deselect this object and reselect it, it's going to be totally fine. Just fix some edges. Okay, cool. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. Okay. Yes, better. It's great. Perfect. Okay, cool. So our pivot point is set up, but basically we have just a couple of cylinders. We need to connect these two together, and we also need to kind of, create a good hierarchy for this, so we don't end up with just a mess when we bring it into the scene. So what I'm going to do is rename stuff. So this is going to be called turret base, and this is going to be called turret barrel. And what we can do is use the parenting in Maya to create a good hierarchy so that when we bring it into Unity, we don't have to do extra work. And this is kind of a good idea because if you're an artist and you know how something should be set up, you want to do it in Maya so that someone bringing it into Unity doesn't get confused or not know how to set something up or break something. So what you need to do is you can either in the outliner middle mouse button click and drag, or you can control select and press P. So I was selected on my barrel, hold down control and click on base, turret base, and then hit P, and it's going to parent it. And now I can do the same thing with turret base and parent it to the tank base. And now my tank is all of these objects, but I can move my turret independently around its axis. So that's what we're going to want to do and bring this into Unity and kind of see how everything looks. So let's select the base object, go to File, Send to Unity, and I'm going to choose Selection. If we did all, then we'd get our rock in the same thing, and we don't want that, so I'm just going to choose, I'll name this Tank, and hit Export. And now back inside of Unity, we have our tank, and we can select it and change our model. Remember to change the scale factor to 100 and hit Apply. But now we can bring it into the scene, and we have a cool little tank. So you see how I said, detail is much different when you're actually in game. All those little details around the tank barrel and stuff we're not really seeing at all. So that's the way it is. Okay, so we have it in the scene, but right now it's just a mesh. It's not connected to our player. So we're going to need to figure out how to add this tank to our player object. And I want to kind of walk you through this because doing it the right way is going to be better for the long term. And creating a good hierarchy, especially for your player, is going to be nice. So let's go through it kind of step by step. Okay, so how your player character, any complex character like the player or enemies or whatever, something that has both code and logic and graphics and all that stuff, the way you structure it is kind of important. And sometimes it's important for like gameplay purposes. Other times it's important just for organization and saving yourself headaches. So when we made this player character, we created it from a primitive shape, obviously this capsule, and we started just kind of adding child game objects, adding components, and we didn't really pay attention to kind of how it was structured. So it's fine for a prototype, but for something that's more sophisticated, where you want to be able to maybe swap out art assets or add particles or other elements, or maybe a little health bar or something that is up above, you want to be more careful about how things are kind of set up and structured. So what I like to do is on my root base game object, I like to have all of my behavior and physics and collisions. And sometimes I add additional collisions or colliders to a character or something like that. But I usually like to have all of my logic on the base object. Then what I do is create a child object which has all of my graphics. So what I'm going to do here is on the player, I'm going to actually delete or remove component on my mesh filter and on my mesh renderer. And because this is a prefab, it is not making those changes. It's not updating those changes until we do an override. We're going to do that at the end of the process, so don't worry about that for now. But I've removed both of these things, which has basically taken the rendering components off. So now all it is this collider. As you can see here, it still has its green collider, rigid body, and player input. Now what I want to do is create a child object and call this graphics. And I'm going to create more of these which have different points or different purposes. I'm going to go ahead and delete my sphere because I don't need that anymore. Oh, that's interesting. So it's not letting me delete it unless I open the prefab. So maybe just go ahead and turn this off for now. We can delete it later. Okay, so my player root object has all of my logic. Now my tank is going to need to live inside of graphics. And so I'm going to drag and drop my enemy and put it into graphics. So first of all, not my enemy, what am I doing? I need to drag and drop my tank and put it into graphics. But let me show you what the tank model has come in to the scene with. So just like in Maya, I had my tank, and then parented to that, I had my turret base and my turret barrel. So these are 3 different game objects that have been set up to, set up in Maya, but that have persisted as they've come in. And they've got some interesting characteristics. So like here you can see they have weird values for the position and scale and things like that. That is because we were pretty kind of fast and loose about our tank. We didn't delete history, we didn't freeze transforms, so we could have done a little bit more cleanup before bringing it in, but never mind. So what we can do here is use these this hierarchy kind of to our advantage. So I'm going to drag and drop my tank into my player, and let's see, I'm going to actually not use graphics. I'm just going to delete that. So I'm going to have player, and then my tank is going to be a child object of player, and then we're going to adjust things so our attack point is actually a child object of our turret barrel. Because as the turret base rotates, That is a problem. So, oh no, it's not. Okay, whew. I thought we broke something. I was selected on the center up here instead of pivot. Okay, good. That's lucky. So yeah, when we set baked our pivot, that did come through accurately. You can see here the pivot point is right where we set it at the very top. So that works. Just make sure you're not selected on center here, and then you can see how the turret barrel will rotate. Okay, so we're gonna set our attack point as a child object, but first of all, we need to do some other stuff. So right now, our player is offset, or sorry, our tank is offset from our player position. So because it's a child object, what we can do is just 0 the position, and now at least kind of to start, when we hit play, we'll see everything moving around. It's not quite right. If we pause, we can see why. Because our root object has a collider that doesn't match our graphics, right? And also, we're rotating the entire object. We still have to set up some logic to rotate just the turret and not the whole tank. But that's progress, right? We have the tank, and let me actually just disable my enemy. He's getting in the way. Okay, here we go. So we have our tank. Another problem is that he's not pointing in the correct direction at all. And that is because we weren't really careful when we set up our scene in Maya. You can see the Z-axis is facing this way, and we've set it up on the X-axis. So to match Unity, we have to have our tank rotated by 90 degrees. Now, because this is a child object and it's not, the graphics aren't like added as components onto the root object, we can do that. We can just rotate our tank to 90 degrees, and we can also position it better. So by adding it as a child object, it improves the ability to modify it down the road. Let's say an artist wanted to swap out these graphics or change something. They wouldn't have to mess with any of the components on this root object. They can just change the child objects and not break other stuff. So let's see if this is working better. Okay, cool. So now we are pointing towards our mouse, but of course the whole tank is pointing in that direction, not just the turret. So we need to add some logic to be able to do that. At this point too, I could, if I wanted, change the type of collision. So instead of this capsule collider, I could change it to be a box collider. And let's actually try that out and see if that works better, because it definitely will look a little, or when it intersects with stuff, it'll look more realistic. Right now I can just clip into things, and I don't like that. So let's go ahead and remove our capsule component collider and do a box collider. Box collider will be more accurate, but it might mean we get stuck on stuff a little bit more easily. Now I'm going to use the properties here to adjust the box collider. Because we have a more complex set of objects nested, if I change things like the scale, I'm going to change the scale of everything that's a child as well. So I'm going to use my properties on the box collider and try and get this better lined up. I'm going to go down by -0.5, increase the X to 1.5, that looks right. Oh yeah, we can match those initial dimensions, so I think Z was 2. Maybe a little bigger because we did some expanding. So there we go. So that's looking pretty good. Let's see if the character moves the same way. Okay, cool. And now we can bump into stuff, and it's a little bit more accurate, which I like. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is update the logic of our game so that we can adjust our turret position independently from our character orientation. And to do this, we're going to open our player input script. And we're actually going to have two adjustments. So we want the forward positioning of the tank to be based on the movement, the direction they're moving, but the aiming to be only modifying the turret. So what I'm going to do first of all is create a new public game object and call this turret base. Okay, and then I'm going to take this variable and copy it, and instead of where we have this transform.lookAt, this was where we look at the mouse point, instead of that being on our on this object, which is what is there by default, we're going to do turretBase.transform.lookAt, and then we are going to uncomment out this line. This is our initial way that we were aiming based on the forward movement vector. So now what's going to happen is this forward movement vector is going to control the orientation of the tank body, and then it's going to come down here and say do the raycasting and orient the position, the rotation of the turret based on the mouse. So let's save and see if this operates. And we do have to hook a couple things up. So we have a new variable here. We have to take our turret base and drag and drop that in. And then let's see if we're good to go. So if I press left, my tank is moving left and right. It's a little bit glitchy. It doesn't do rotation or anything like that. And our turret is kind of working right now. It's actually suffering from the exact same problem that our tank was. It is shooting out at, or it's pointing out at the wrong angle. And again, that was because in Maya we weren't careful and didn't set this up properly. So how do we fix that? Well, this is a little bit trickier because this game object that we're rotating here is actually the same object that has all of our mesh associated with it. So what we can do is go to click on our tank and do create empty and name this turret base. Now there are two turret bases, but we can drag and drop this in, hopefully. Curses, it won't let us do it. So let's do this. Let's take this turret base object and move it out. Actually, this is a little bit of an annoying situation. I'm just going to fix it in Maya, and maybe that was what we should have done from the very beginning. So in Maya, I'm going to take my whole tank, and I'm going to rotate it by 90 degrees. Actually, let's do -90, so it's pointing down the correct axis. And then I'm going to do delete history, and I'm going to do freeze transformations, and then I'm going to click on turret base, make sure that has also got frozen transformations, which it does. All of these are 0. Okay, let's re-export this, send to Unity, selection, and then overwrite our tank. We should have to only fix the rotation of the parent. Let's see. Okay, cool. So now we can go and click on our tank and turn this back to 0. Let's see if that's fixed our barrel. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so note to self, when you're setting up your model, make sure it's pointed in the right orientation, especially if you're going to have stuff going on. Okay, so there's one last thing to fix. We're almost done, and that is where the attack point is located. Now I said we want to parent our attack point to the turret barrel, and let's go ahead and do that. And to do that, we need to open the prefab. So let's first click on it, go to our overrides, and hit apply to update our prefab, and then let's try it again. Go to open prefab and just do it in here. And probably need to reposition it so that it's located close to the front of the barrel here. It's just off. Okay. There we go. Nice. And let's see if this works. Perfect. Very cool. Okay, so this was a little bit fast and we went over a ton of stuff. So I just wanted to show you this stuff. I'm not expecting you in the assignment to do exactly what I'm doing. In fact, you don't need to have a turret that turns or anything like that. I just wanted to kind of show you how this worked. But you know, I'd in fact like to see what you come up with in a more sort of creative way. So do something different, and I'm looking forward to kind of seeing what you create. And check the assignment description just to see what the requirements are. It's not too hefty, so just as long as you you know the process of importing models and you get custom models in, that's fine.